Welcome to World Builders Anonymous. Kick that world building addiction and actually finish that novel with your hosts Vito and John.
Oh, are you drinking something?
Oh, yeah. I have a glass of water.
Yeah.
I went as basic as you can go today.
It's boring. I had some Zevia, stevia sweetened soda, but we drank it all, as one tends to do when you have Zevia around the house.
Yeah, we used to purchase that, but then I realized we were buying so much of it and drinking it in like 3 days. And so we stopped doing
Yep.
that.
That's the thing. I've been researching the prices because since we just moved to South Carolina, all the stores are new. Well, a lot of familiar stores like Kroger and Walmart, but the prices are all new for different things. And there's a lot of them on the island and on the mainland. And I wanted to see where the cheapest stuff is for all the different items we always purchase, like natural peanut butter and grass-fed butter and what is the cheapest healthy protein, all that kind of stuff. So I've been making like a whole like Google Docs spreadsheet of like cross-referencing different items by store. And I would like go to the stores with a notepad and write down the prices per ounce of all these different things and stuff. It's been kind of insane. I've spent way too much time on it, honestly. But it has already saved us some money. But I realized very quickly, though, that you can't just buy, like, say Sam's Club has the most, cheap stuff per ounce. You can't just go to Sam's Club and buy a crap ton of everything because say you buy 3 pounds of potato chips and it's like the best deal per ounce, but then you have 3 pounds of potato chips and you eat it all in 3 days.
Yes, you eat potato chips at a new and alarming rate.
Into your mouth, as we are prone to do. And then you've spent, $12 on potato chips, even though it was a good deal, and it's all gone now.
They last you the same time as $3 worth of potato chips.
So you can't just buy bulk, especially snacks. You have to figure out what you're using in a metered sort of fashion, like toilet paper or even almond milk for us because we use it as coffee creamer, and we're not just going to drink mass amounts of coffee if we just have it available. So it's good to buy that in bulk. But it's not so good to buy, chocolate or trail mix or something like that in bulk because you're just going to shovel it all into your mouth because it's easy. Especially for us because we're big time snackers.
This has been today's public service announcement
for
all of you out there who struggle with these questions.
So instead of cracking a soda, we're lecturing you about the dangers of buying soda, even if it is healthy for you.
And instead of the sad doink from last time, perhaps I can give you a satisfying ding of a glass. Ready?
Oh, that was
so
very satisfying. Wow.
Oh, so satisfying.
I like that a lot. Let's do that every time now.
That was so much better than I thought it was going to be.
That was very musical, actually.
Oh, it was lovely. Anyway, moving on.
Should we talk about something related to writing now, I guess?
I imagine so.
Welcome, everybody, to World Builders Anonymous. I am Vito, and that is John. We don't introduce ourselves enough for anyone.
But here we are.
I often think if anyone new has been listening for the last, however many episodes since we've done any sort of explanation of who we are and what we're doing, they might be very confused.
Go back and listen to the old ones.
Yeah, it's a good excuse to go back and listen
We've
to some World
explained
podcasts.
ourselves before.
Yes, and it's in the description, all that kind of stuff. We're basically trying to finish novels in whatever fashion that we figure out how to do it in. And sharing it all with you, hopefully, and avoiding a lot of the pitfalls we've encountered in the past, which was a very present thing in my mind today. I was going back over a lot of old notes and stuff today because I've been thinking, I over the last few weeks, I've mentioned I might be switching tacks and switching stories to a new idea that I've had for a while about a world ship that is hurtling through space and the civilizations that rise and fall on this world ship over the generations and that kind of stuff. But in keeping with our, mantra and our goal with this whole podcast, I've decided not to do that after all. With the
At least not for right now.
My lovely wife, who was very confused about my decision, and she's always been my best sort of story companion, I guess.
Yeah, right.
Other than you, of course, John.
Hey.
But yes, I agree with her. I think I should stick with my original plan and my original story and keep pressing on through that. I was going back over my notes today to try to get it all back fresh in my head for a writing session. I got a little bit of writing done, and I think I'm back on track with where I want to go with it. Yeah. But it brought a lot of the same old reasons for why I wanted to drop that back to my mind. because I was reading through these many, many different drafts of scenes I had written over years, honestly. And they were all so different. They were all kind of had some good ideas, but they were maybe a different track than I'm on now or had been before. And it was almost more confusing than it was helpful at times. I had to really decide to stick with only stuff I had written in the past year, or else I was just going to get way off track, as we always do. But I noticed something in a lot of those old scenes I had written, which is they all have like one idea in them, and then they kind of end, and I didn't continue them because I didn't know what came next. And so instead of trying to figure it out or just pressing through it, I would start a new scene. Maybe in a different part of the book, but more often it was just a different version of the same scene or an alternate opening, or I would change a bunch of things about my outline that I had at the time and then write a new beginning of it again, and then kind of like it, but not really, and then write a different version of it, and then a different version of it, and then drop the whole thing, change the outline again, and it went nowhere.
And then decide to write about world ships.
And then I decided to write about world ships. The end. But no.
And thus was the life of Vito.
Exactly, yes. But when we decided to go with the whole discovery writing thing, that started working okay. But then I quickly found myself in the same old trap of I wrote one scene that had like one plot idea in it, and when that scene ended, I didn't really know where to go from there because I was excited to write whatever happened in that one scene, and then I had no idea what came next, and I wasn't really interested in it anymore. And I was thinking to myself today, how can we avoid that trap? Other than just, pure muscling through it mentally and just sit down and decide what to do next and do it, which is good too. It's, if that's all you
practice,
can do, that's great.
It's not sustainable though, long term.
Because you just, yes, you can do that, but you lose all of the interest you have in your story when you do that, at least temporarily. Oftentimes I've found that if I actually do that, I'll find something else interesting and kind of get on a new track, but it might take some time, and there's something to be said for that. But I was wondering to myself, how can we avoid that? And I think it has to do with this tendency I noticed to have only one plot element or thread running through any individual scene, which usually only lasted about 1,500 to 2,000 words at most in all of these old scenes I'd written. And I don't quite know 100% how to fix that, but I thought we might talk through it today, and I have a few ideas for what to focus on maybe as I go forward with this story idea, I guess, which I think I mentioned before has it's the one, if you guys have heard the other podcast episodes, it's the one with the salvage divers, essentially.
Yes.
Which has evolved through a lot of different iterations.
Not to be mistaken with my story that includes salvage divers.
Which you're not writing right now, so...
Well, there are salvage divers connected, but not as much so.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And we did come up with those completely independently, which is still weird to me, but...
I think that's the strangest thing.
Yeah. But yeah, so the biggest thing I've been thinking in terms of how to solve this is to anticipate where your story's going as much as you can, and this is especially hard when you're discovery writing, I think, but anticipate where it's going, or any idea that you've ruminated on for a long time, like I have with this idea. You kind of have a lot of dangling threads all over the place. I have a lot of characters, a lot of plot elements that have gone in and out of my mind over the years related to this, and I have a general idea of where the story wants to go, although there's a lot of alternate sort of paths it could take. And there's a few characters in particular I know I want, but I have never actually written into a scene because they all are incorporated into the story at a later, period. Mm-hmm. So instead of just thinking to myself, okay, for example, I was reading one scene, I wrote that the only thing that happens in it is there's this coup, essentially, where the imperial leadership is basically wiped out, and then the perpetrators escape. And that's all that actually happens. And that's all that actually is set up. That's the only idea that relates to anything in the story, is all to do with that. There's no setup for future payoff for anything else. And so I was thinking to myself, I wonder how I could... and because of that, I guess I should finish that thought. Because of that, the story just goes nowhere after that scene's over. because there's
Right.
nothing that comes next, logically speaking. Not only in the story, but in my own head.
You don't know what comes next, and you're not prepared to write it.
Yeah, exactly. So even if you're discovery writing, it might be good to somehow think of how you can set up what comes next in the scene you're writing right now, instead of just focusing on, what's actually happening sort of on screen, as it were. If you're thinking of this as a movie, don't just think of what's happening on screen. Think of what is coming and how you can set that up, which is a simple concept, I guess, but I don't know why it had never really occurred to me like that before, especially when I was actually sitting down to write, because the way I think I'm motivated to write is when I get excited about one idea, and then I sit down and I write that idea, and then I have no more inspiration sometimes.
Yeah, right. Well, and I think everyone kind of discovery writes differently, and there are different things that might play to one person's strength that another person has no idea what to do with. So for me, the way I kind of handle that, or at least the way I've attempted to handle that, and I'm about 10 chapters into my story, the way I've done that so far is I kind of segment the writing process into pieces, and I look ahead to a point that I want to get to. And the first time I did that when I started writing, as I said, I want to get to the point where Darren is no longer the only character in the story. That was the first goal, because Darren enters the book opens on Darren alone and stranded in this city, and he knows no one. And eventually he meets someone who gets to kind of go along the journey with him. That's Warren. And that happens a few chapters in. And so the first thing I wanted to do is get to that point. And I thought about what that looked like and where I wanted to go in 3 chapters. And then I just started writing and kind of let the chips fall where they may. And that's been working for me so far. I've done that a few times. And honestly, what's kind of held me up, I haven't written much in the last few weeks because I don't have another point to get to yet, and I haven't decided what's going to happen. I started writing today because I finally decided. What? Go ahead.
Oh, so kind of like you almost pick, almost like you're aiming for a target, and then you just kind of fill in the gaps in between those two sort of points.
Yeah, basically. And it's not one chapter because I think that's kind of too small a target to shoot for in any kind of span of time, because doesn't take that long to write a chapter, really, once you're in it and working on it actively. But once you set, a cluster of 3 to 5 chapters and set that as your goal, you then have some space to work with and play with, and then allowing yourself within the confines of those few chapters begin to set up other plot elements. I think if I was working on a specific chapter by chapter basis, integrating other storylines would be harder. One thing that I've been doing to counteract that is the same thing, where because I'm working in a cluster of chapters, I kind of have a little more room to play with in adding other elements of the story. And it remains to be seen if that really works yet. I know that I'm going to have to go back and change and add a lot of stuff as far as not filler, but you know what I mean by filler when I say it that way, like adding stuff that happens that's not the main plot and that may not even directly impact our main character, but other stuff that's going on in the story, because you can't just have a linear story with no cutaways of any kind.
Yeah, and I think that's what I'm talking about mainly. It's not just setting up other things for the future of the main plot. It's also just, I don't know, having it feel like real people doing real things rather than sort of characters in a cutscene in a video game. They're just kind of doing their thing, and then their thing is over, and then you just kind of, I don't know, it leaves no impact. It's just kind of people doing things.
Yeah, right.
And
I think a lot of that stuff is handled in my... So I've mentioned before that when I'm actively writing, when I'm in a phase, I guess, of actively writing, like I'm writing consistently at least a few days a week for a good period of time, my mind just constantly goes over details of the story, and I'm always trying to think of the thing that's going to happen next. And part of that usually tends to include figuring out things like where characters have been and where they're going. So I haven't written anything to do with Barnabas's backstory. Barnabas is kind of like the head of this underground, thieves guild, you could call it. That's a very poor way to describe it, but it's good enough for now. He's the head of that. And all you know about him is that he's the head of this thing. You really know very little about him in the point in the writing I am. And I'm also discovery writing, and so I don't have this document with any kind of details about anything. There's no collected, batch of information about Barnabas as a character. But in my mind, I've thought about him so much that I've considered different things that I could have going for him, and I've concluded on a rough storyline that's gotten him to where he is. And I find when I do that, when I kind of keep turning characters over in my head and consider where they came from and where they're going, I kind of almost develop subplots based on those things, and that's enough. Like, so Barnabas used to work for the guy that Darren's trying to find, and Barnabas knows that he's not really a good guy, but Darren doesn't know that. But Barnabas doesn't know that Darren's looking for him. And so there's like a dynamics of relationships that blend themselves very well into developing other plot lines in the story, because they revolve around the relationships between characters, but not necessarily the ones that are driving the main plot. And so that's kind of the way that I'm trying to develop side plots. And again, I'm going to have to go back and add a lot of stuff, because I can tell as I'm writing that I'm being a little too linear, but
yeah, and it's hard not
there are definitely
to be.
ways to do it.
Yeah, hard not to be, especially when you're discovery writing. I like what you were saying, though, kind of taking a very character-based approach to side plots, I guess, or it's almost wrong to say side plots, because they should all feel like one, continuous whole that supports itself. But yeah, deviations should definitely be for character's sake, not just to have something on the side that happens that's interesting. Yeah,
well, and there can be really significant side plots too. I mean, if you think about the Harry Potter, mythos or whatever you want to say.
The first one.
Well, you've seen the movies; it's enough.
That's true. A million people just went, no, it's not.
And I should clarify, it's enough for the point I'm about to illustrate. The books are better than the movies. Don't get mad at me. So the overall story arc of Harry Potter has to do with Harry Potter and Voldemort and his parents and his that stuff. That's the main overarching plot of Harry Potter, right? That's what the whole thing's about. But if you think of, let's just go with book 4, The Goblet of Fire, there's the whole Triwizard tournament or whatever that has on its face nothing to do with the main plot of Harry Potter, right? It has nothing to do with any of it. But in the end, J.K. Rowling flips it around at the end of the book and makes it about Voldemort. And he's actually been orchestrating this the whole time, and it progresses the thing further. But you don't know it basically the whole time you're going through. It's just another adventure, and then it flips on you at the end. Until then, it's a side plot. It's not like you're just going along, walking through the adventures of these characters, and then you realize at the end, oh, this has all been in an effort to advance the plot.
Yeah, it's not like Harry wakes up every day going, how can I defeat Voldemort today? What can I do today that advances my anti-Voldemort agenda? Or whatever. He's just a kid doing kid stuff with his friends, and sometimes they just do silly things that are entertaining and make you love them even more. And then if you're, I guess, the author just sort of deftly weaves that into this overall narrative. But it's not like every single chapter is like Voldemort must die, that kind of thing.
Right. And so you have to maintain, and that's a good way to tell stories too, because, I mean, think about the things that you're trying to achieve in life, even though you're not a part of some momentous storyline as far as, anything to be a good novel. But you don't wake up and think necessarily about all the things that you're doing on a long-term basis. You're just kind of living life and doing the things that come up as you go, and you're going through your routines, and, there's a lot of stuff like that going on. And it all eventually adds up to something, of course, but you don't feel that as you're going. And so when you're writing, if you're making it solely about this plot and this character's only waking moment, every waking moment is dedicated to the sole thought of overcoming this immense obstacle that, that's boring storytelling, because and here's the thing, we basically know the main character is going to be triumphant in the end. We know that good's going to triumph over evil. And so if you make it exclusively about that, we know the ending already. You got to make it about more than that.
That's a good point. And we talk about it a lot, but Name of the Wind is a great example of this, because that plot just goes everywhere. Oh my gosh!
Well, you forget at times what it's all about.
Yeah, especially in the second book. Oh my gosh! At times I forgot what the Chandrian even was, and I think Voth did too.
Yeah, right.
But for anyone who hasn't read that book, that might not make a lot of sense. But the point is, I think I need to relax and allow myself to write things that aren't directly related to my overarching main through line plot thread that I have in mind, or even my main, I guess, message that I want to convey with the story. Like, for example, the old story idea I had, and to some extent the current one, is based on the prodigal son story from the Bible, and I wanted to say a lot about family and relationships and that kind of stuff with that story. But I think I get too hyper focused on that sometimes, and I don't let myself explore what the characters want, who they are, outside of that one goal I have for them, to that one part I have them for them to play.
That's kind of why I developed is a very fancy word for this, but that's why I've been writing in this sort of chapter cluster idea. Is it forces me to have that room, because I know where I want to go. I know nothing about how I'm going to get there. I know that I want Darren to be in this position in 5 chapters, but I have 5 chapters to get him there. And
which allows you some room to kind of let him explore in your mind, I guess.
Right. And I think not being a very experienced writer almost works to my advantage in that way, because I don't know enough to write a solid through line from one point to the other. And so I inevitably go down paths, and I see this shiny thing over there. I'm like, I could play with that for a while.
Totally.
And then I realize, Darren's supposed to be trying to figure out how to use his new magical powers. Let's put something about that in there. And then I have some of that. And then you do something else. And then 5 chapters later, you find yourself where you wanted to be.
Yeah.
And hopefully what you've done resembles something of a narrative.
Totally. And hopefully you can go back later and salvage what's great about it, and sort of let the chaff fall to the ground and separate it from the wheat, and make something more cohesive out of it. But at least you have the building blocks there. Whereas I was actually going to say the exact same thing. I feel like when I first started writing, I got so much more content written because I wasn't so dead set on executing things the right way and trying to make everything point to the main purpose of the story, kind of make everything support itself, and tie back into something, and all those sorts of good things that obviously I'm not very skilled at actually doing, but now I know that's what you're supposed to do or something. Mm-hmm. Or I've kind of got it in my head that that's what you're supposed to do, at least, as I've kind of read more and studied more about how to write, which I think we've mentioned before on the podcast, how that can sometimes trip you up. And I think I need to relax and let myself just get back into that discovery sort of free-flowing mode that I kind of look down on sometimes. I look back at my first couple of stories I wrote, and it's basically cool fight scenes tied together with some dialogue.
But that's something. It's there.
Right, yeah. And there were a lot of interesting ideas I thought that I had back then that I think I still have now, but I've kind of... maybe I judge my own writing from then too much. And that cripples me from making myself as productive as I was back then. I don't know.
Yeah, that's easy to do. I've been trying to really give myself permission to just follow what I'm enjoying, because I feel like that's probably going to end up being my best writing, is the stuff that I enjoyed putting on paper. And so as I encounter Warren as a character, I realize that I really like him, and I think he's fun to write. And I laugh to myself when I'm writing him because I see this silly character in my mind. And so I want to put more of him in the book, and I'm allowed to do that because I'm the author and there's no plan, so I can do whatever I want. And that freedom, I think, can lend itself really well to creative and interesting storytelling, even though it requires a certain amount of discipline, because you can't go too far down that path or else you never end up with a cohesive narrative.
Yeah, and that's what editing and revision is all about, right?
Yeah.
I think that's a good goal to have for me in the next couple weeks, is to, and I think I've mentioned that before, but now that I'm somewhat settled here in South Carolina, and we're actually going to be finally moving into our permanent residence here in the next 5 or 6 days. So after that's all done, the moving company was a little slower than we thought they'd be, but after that's done, I'll definitely have a lot more time to sit down and work on this stuff. And that's going to be my main goal, is to just relax and just, maybe not... I'll use the same story I originally had in mind for the Discover Writing thing we were doing, but I'm going to let it meander a little bit more, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Oh, totally.
And let the characters care about things other than their job as it relates to the events I have in mind for this scene, you know?
Yeah. I mentioned this to you before. One of the things that helped me do that was finding the right starting point for the story. And I like stories that start with something interesting and movement oriented surrounding the plot, but I don't want it to be like an action scene or something that's confusing that I have to catch up on. I want it to be simple enough for me to understand, but be involved in the plot and move the plot forward. And when you do that, when you find that good starting place that lets you do the things you want to do, you allow yourself more freedom to explore other things and to introduce other elements as you go, because you're suddenly not so focused on trying to explain what's going on to the reader, because it's a good point to ease them into it. You don't have to explain stuff, which means you can focus more of your attention on adding other details into the story and establishing other plot lines like that. So, I don't know, for whatever that's worth. That's kind of
totally, and I think
helped me a lot.
Totally, I think that's really helpful. I also think it's probably best at this point in our writing, since we're just trying to get enough words out to constitute an entire book,
Yes.
to worry less about the reader at this phase of writing and worry more about the story.
Yeah, sure.
And kind of our own, I guess, immersion and losing ourselves in it and letting it flow out, rather than figuring out, is this the best way to convey this to the reader, you know, at this point. Of course, it's good to think about that, but I think that is another factor that can lead to stalling, I think.
Oh, sure. Everything is a pitfall.
Everything is bad.
The longer you live, the more you learn that there's nothing good in life, and you should just give up.
That's not what I meant.
Life lessons with World Builders Anonymous.
Also, don't buy soda.
If we've learned two things today.
And don't buy snacks in bulk, kids.
Don't buy sodas or snacks in bulk, and everything is pain and life is misery. All right. Have a good week, everyone. Hope you've enjoyed it.
Oh, boy. That's kind of what it felt like today, going through my old writing and be like, I suck at this. I'm never going to do it. Everything is bad and terrible.
No, there's always... That's the thing about writing, is there's limitless potential. You know, you can equally write the next classic as you can.
Yeah.
You know,
Totally.
hot garbage. And
yeah,
both are equally possible.
Definitely. And it wasn't all bad. I like a lot of the ideas I've had over the years. It's just a question of sifting through all of them, and it's not even that. That's bad, Vito. Bad. That's not what you need to do.
Bad.
It's not sifting through your old ideas. It's letting the accumulated sort of progress you've made on this story just kind of be what it is. Take that for what it's worth in the present moment, and just let it all flow out. That's
Let
my
it
goal.
all fall where it may.
All fall where it may. There we go. So that's my goal. There we go. I've said it. There, I said it.
We've tied a bow on it. That's it.
Cool. Well, we're around the half-hour mark. We might have a quick moment if there was something else you wanted to talk about today, John.
I'll throw this in really quick. We don't have to spend a lot of time on it. I talked a few episodes ago about Triss as a character. She is the eventual Darren love interest, as far as I'm going to put that in the book, which is not a love story by any means, but a romantic relationship in a book is a good way to add some emotional weight to some things, and it's effective storytelling when it's not shoehorned in for no reason.
And darn
I
it,
hope
it's
think
fun.
That's not what it is. And darn it, it's just gosh darn interesting to read. Anyway, so I was struggling a little bit ago about how I wanted to handle her character. I don't want her to be just a shoehorned in love interest that has no character of her own, because that's bad writing and bad treatment of any character. And I also don't want her to be any kind of trope or stereotype. I want her to be a real character with real motivations and whatnot. And I was juggling a couple of kind of character, not tropes, but character types to have her as. One being like a really capable thief that's just way better than Darren, and he has to kind of rely on her for a lot of things. That has its own issues. And I also had the idea of her being kind of a enthusiastic but held back character with a lot of the thief and crime stuff. Like, her mom doesn't want her to do it, so she kind of holds her back somewhat. And I didn't like that idea that much either. I think some combination thereof is actually the right decision. I think if you go down a route where she's good at these things and she does them, maybe her her mom wants her to stay out of this crime life for her own sake. And so she disapproves kind of, but allows her to do what she wants to do to an extent. And Triss is really good at these things, but has this conflict in her own head because her mom doesn't want her to do it for good reasons. And, maybe you can arrive at some good tension and drama there while not putting her into some very specific and not very good trope situation. That's kind of the thoughts that I had around that. I think that middle ground is a good place to be.
Yeah, as it typically seems to be,
Yeah, anytime you're arguing with yourself over two extremes, the middle might be a good spot to live.
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea, though. Yeah, it's hard to write a character that's balanced like that it feels real and but also vulnerable and strong but vulnerable, that kind of stuff.
Which is complicated. She's probably the most prominent female character in the book, and I'm not a lady. And I don't have much experience being one, and so it's harder for me to write in that headspace already, and then complicate that with the fact that I want her to seem like a really solid, real, and emotionally interesting character, and it's hard to do that, and it's a challenge I've never had to really do before.
Yeah,
so
it's hard to write female characters sometimes. Not like you said, not being of the female persuasion. Not that it's impossible, of course, because we're all human. We all have a certain amount of commonality that in our experience. But I do wonder sometimes, like, is this something that a girl would read and go, oh, I can relate with, that kind of thing.
Unfortunately, I have a wife and can ask her.
That is true.
So
me too.
That's helpful.
Yeah, that is helpful. And it's important to remember, girls are just people too.
That's exactly it. That's why that's one of the things I said to myself in thinking of this stuff is like, she doesn't have to have this extreme one way or the other reality. She's just another person, another character.
Right.
So write her like you just don't make a big deal about it. Just write her as a character.
Yeah, there's far more in common than is different. Yeah.
Yeah. I think I kind of psyched myself out about it a little bit, and then I came back to reality. I'm like, hey, wait a second.
I think people do in general,
fine.
too. I mean, yes, there's challenges associated with writing someone who's not your, group of whatever kind, that kind of thing. But we're all people, guys. We can all put ourselves in somebody else's shoes to a certain extent, and then check with somebody who might, be able to put themselves in those shoes even more, realistically or accurately, and see if it's ringing true, I guess. But yeah, don't just not do it or whatever.
Don't do bad things.
Don't do bad things.
That's the third lesson for today.
What was the second one?
Second one was everything's terrible and you should never try.
So don't buy snacks in bulk. Everything's terrible. Don't even try. And I already forgot the third one.
Oh gosh, I did too.
Oh my gosh! Wow.
But it was, yeah. Good idea.
It's only going to spiral down from here.
As if it hasn't already. Anyway.
Cool.
Well, let's call that a podcast, and I will now plug the things.
Okay, do it.
Let's do it. Okay. If you enjoyed the show and you would like to give a review on iTunes, we appreciate that. That's always awesome. You can email us if you want to do that also. If you want to ask us some questions or offer some criticisms or some thoughts or... you can hear my dog? Alaska.
I did hear
Go
that.
away. Just be quiet. It's not the time to yawn, to whine at me. If you have stories you would like us to read some of and critique for you, we would be happy to do that, as long as you don't all email us at once. So you can send all of those things to wbapodcast@gmail.com. We'd be happy to receive your emails. You can find us on social media, on most of them, the basics, the Facebooks, the Instagrams, the Twitters. That's World Builders Anonymous. We are on Reddit, WBA_podcast. You can see us on the Fantasy Writer subreddit from time to time, critiquing first chapters, engaging in conversation, and doing all kinds of fun things. And we have a website, www.worldbuildersanonymous.com, where we do some stuff too. We probably should do more on the website at some point, but then again, we have no time. So,
Don't look behind the curtain, people. It's not pretty.
No, it's a pretty website.
No. I mean, like the man behind the curtain. It's just.
Oh, you're doing a thing. I get you.
Nobody wants to know how the sausage is made.
How do you make sausage?
Don't ask.
Okay.
Anyway, thanks for listening, guys, and we'll see you next week. Oh, I remember the third lesson.
Oh, what was it?
Don't do bad things.
Bye, everyone.
show is sponsored in part by Audible. Visit worldbuildersanonymous.com/audible to check out what the guys are listening to right now and to receive a free audiobook.